Hello friends and welcome to Battleforge Legends, the place where we explore the epic and dramatic pages of human history. Today, we'll step into 1940, a time when the British Empire faced a life-or-death challenge in the Mediterranean, where the fate of an empire was decided. If you love history, war stories, and profound lessons from the past, hit that subscribe button now and turn on the notification bell to never miss a video. Join us and let's begin this journey. In June 1940, the world was plunged into hell. The Nazi German army, like a storm of steel, tore through Europe, advancing on Paris and forcing France, a former world-dominating power, to its knees in just 6 weeks. But then, from the shadows of the Mediterranean, another monster awoke: Benito Mussolini. Italy's Il Duce seized the opportunity to join the war by invading southern France. This was no ordinary attack. It was a deadly strike aimed at the heart of the British Empire. Did you know a single wrong decision here could have starved Britain, collapsed the empire, and ended World War II sooner than you might think? Today, we'll uncover that dark chapter of history, the British Empire strategy in the Mediterranean in 1940, where the sea became a battlefield and the empire faced its day of reckoning. Background of the crisis and Mediterranean strategy. The context at the time was a global nightmare. Germany had taken control of Western Europe, and Italy, with ambitions to revive the Roman Empire, had been expanding since the 1930s. They occupied Ethiopia in 1935, Albania in 1939, and now set their sights on the Balkans, North Africa, and even Tunisia and the French fleet. The Mediterranean theater erupted from the Horn of Africa to Gibraltar, a narrow sea that held the lifeblood of the world. Gibraltar controlled the gateway to the Atlantic. Malta, the indomitable island, was a base for air raids. Alexandria and the Suez Canal were the link from the Indian Ocean to Britain. Losing these points would isolate Britain, severing its imperial lifeline. Winston Churchill, the newly appointed prime minister, faced a life-or-death choice. Initially, the plan was to withdraw the Mediterranean fleet to protect the home islands, avoiding risk. But Churchill, with his genius and daring vision, canceled it all. He decided to stay, turning the war into a prolonged battle of attrition, relying on the immense power of the British Empire, 25% of the world's population, 30% of its territory. Why? Because Britain depended on the empire for survival. It imported 60% of its food from its colonies. From Canadian wheat to Australian beef, from Indian tea to Malayan rubber. Randolph Churchill, the Prime Minister's son, once warned, "If we lose the empire, we'll starve in 6 months." This wasn't a war for honor, it was a war for existence. But that empire was cracking. The dominions like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and South Africa had to voluntarily join the fight, while India and other colonies simmered with independence movements. Mussolini thought Italy could easily swallow them, but Churchill turned the Mediterranean into a deadly trap. From Mers-el-Kébir to Taranto, from the Egyptian desert to the Greek mountains, Britain would strike back, exposing Italy's weaknesses and the seeds of its own empire's decline. Join us to explore this journey, where history is not just the past, but a lesson for today. Deeper context of the crisis and Mediterranean strategy. Now let's dive into the essence of this crisis. The Mediterranean was not just a sea, it was the main artery of the British Empire where all trade routes converged. Gibraltar, known as the Rock, controlled the Atlantic gateway with fortified strongholds and underground tunnels capable of housing thousands of soldiers. From here, Britain could blockade any force trying to enter. Malta, the tiny island between Sicily and North Africa, became a critical airbase where British planes could attack Italian ships and protect supply convoys. And Alexandria, the great port in Egypt, was the hub of the Suez Canal, the shortest route from India to Britain, cutting the journey from 12,000 miles around the Cape of Good Hope to just 8,000 miles. Losing any of these points would mean Britain facing starvation and severe fuel shortages. Mussolini's ambitions were not random. Since the 1930s, Italy had built a colonial empire in Africa, Eritrea, Somaliland, and especially Libya, their largest colony. Mussolini dreamed of Mare Nostrum, our sea reviving ancient Rome. He invested in the military, but prioritized quantity over quality, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, but lacking modern tanks, radio communications, and robust logistics. When Italy declared war on June 10, 1940, they aimed to seize Tunisia from Vichy, France, and expand into Egypt. But Britain, though exhausted after Dunkirk, realized the Mediterranean was the key to prolonging the war. Churchill, in his speech to the House of Commons, declared, "We shall fight on the beaches, in the fields, and on the seas. We shall never surrender." The decision to maintain the Mediterranean fleet under Admiral Andrew Cunningham was a massive gamble. Instead of retreating to defend Britain, Churchill chose direct confrontation, leveraging naval superiority to control the routes. This attrition strategy rested on the global empire's foundation. The British Empire was not just territory. It was a vast economic system. From Canada to Australia, from India to South Africa, colonies supplied raw materials, oil from Iraq, iron ore from Sierra Leone, and rubber from Malaya. In 1940, Britain imported over 50 million tons of goods by sea, mostly from the empire. Losing the Mediterranean would force convoys to detour around Africa, increasing the risk of German U-boat attacks. Moreover, the empire provided manpower. Millions of soldiers from the dominions would be mobilized despite internal conflicts. Churchill understood that by tying down Italy, here Britain could buy time to strengthen its forces and await America's involvement. But the risks were enormous. Italy had a large air force with over 1,800 planes capable of threatening Malta and British convoys. Germany, though focused on the Soviet Union, could support Italy at any moment. Churchill faced internal challenges. Some generals like Wavell initially doubted their ability to hold out, and Parliament worried about losses. Yet this decision shaped 1940. From a weakening empire, Britain transformed into a resilient force using geography to counter numbers. The upcoming battles like Mers-el-Kébir and Taranto would prove the value of this strategy, but also reveal the empire's cracks, independence movements in India, discontent in South Africa, and pressure from dominions demanding greater autonomy. Simon Ball, a WWII historian, analyzed Churchill's Mediterranean strategy was not just military. It was political, economic, and imperial, a fragile thread keeping Britain from collapse. This was the foundation for what was to come, a tumultuous year where the British Empire faced its greatest challenge, in immobilizing the British Empire. With the Mediterranean strategy set, Britain had to transform the empire into a colossal war machine. This was a true imperial war, not just to defend territory, but to dominate global trade routes from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic. The British Empire at the time was a complex network. The self-governing dominions like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and South Africa led the charge, while India and other colonies provided vast resources. This mobilization was not easy. It faced political disputes, social unrest, and simmering internal conflicts. Starting with the White Dominions, countries with mostly European populations. Australia and New Zealand were the first to declare war just hours after Britain. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Michael Savage, a Labour leader, declared boldly, "We are part of the empire, and we will fight for shared freedom." However, recruitment faced major hurdles. Soldiers' pay was low, only 5 shillings a day, leading many young men to prioritize domestic economic jobs like mining or farming. Australia launched large-scale propaganda campaigns using posters and short films to appeal to patriotism, emphasizing that defending Australia means defending Britain. Even so, by late 1940, Australia sent 2 divisions to the Middle East, making significant contributions to the desert forces. New Zealand, with a smaller population, mobilized 140,000 men, mostly volunteers, but had to contend with anti-war movements from Irish Catholic groups. South Africa presented a more complex picture. Tensions between Dutch-origin Boers and the British lingered from the Boer War of 1899–1902. Prime Minister J.B.M. Hertzog initially remained neutral, but was replaced by Jan Smuts, a former Boer leader who now supported Britain. Smuts led South Africa into the war with a slim parliamentary majority, but only about 5% of white men were eligible to serve due to strict health standards and political discontent. Many Boers formed the Ossawa Braunwag organization, supporting Germany and engaging in sabotage. Smuts used emergency laws to suppress them, arresting thousands. Still, South Africa provided crucial forces for North Africa, with black and colored units serving as laborers, though facing discrimination. Canada, with its unique position, declared war a week later to assert legislative sovereignty. Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King adopted a limited liability policy, avoiding conscription to prevent divisions between English and French communities in Quebec. Instead, Canada focused on volunteers and weapons production. From a small army of 4,500, it rapidly expanded to 200,000, sending its first division to Britain and later to the Mediterranean. Canada became the arsenal of the empire, producing tanks, planes, and submarines at a breakneck pace thanks to its strong industrial economy. India, the empire's crown jewel, was the largest but most unstable resource. The Indian Army in 1940 numbered about 250,000, mainly recruited from martial races like Sikhs, Nepalese Gurkhas, and Pathans. These units were renowned for loyalty and combat skills, having fought in World War I. However, the Indian National Congress, led by Gandhi and Nehru, demanded full autonomy in exchange for support. Viceroy Lord Linlithgow refused, leading to protests and arrests of leaders. Still, millions of Indians volunteered, hoping the war would bring independence. India supplied not only soldiers, but also food, weapons, and strategic bases. Other colonies like Nigeria, Kenya, and Burma contributed sailors, pilots, and laborers. For example, the King's African Rifles from East Africa with 100,000 men. But the empire had to suppress anti-colonial movements. In Iraq, Rashid Ali's pro-Axis rebellion forced British military intervention. Judith Brown, a historian specializing in India, remarked, "Mobilization in India was a testament to imperial strength, but also a spark for the post-war independence movement." This mobilization was not just military. It revealed mutual dependence and cracks ready to erupt. Initial Italian failures and British counterattacks. Benito Mussolini's ambitions were not limited to joining the war. He dreamed of a new Italian empire dominating North Africa and the Mediterranean. After France's surrender on June 22, 1940, Mussolini targeted the French fleet, a powerful naval force that could shift the balance, and Tunisia, a French colony in North Africa. But the plan to attack the Alps into southern France quickly became a disaster. The Italian army under General Pietro Badoglio charged into rugged mountainous terrain without adequate preparation. They lacked warm clothing, modern climbing equipment, and even detailed maps. The attack began on June 21st, but advanced only a few kilometers before being halted by French artillery in bad weather. Heavy rain turned roads into mud, bogging down light Fiat tanks, and Italian soldiers suffered heavy losses from enemy fire. When France signed the armistice on June 24th, Italy gained only a small piece of territory, Menton and a few villages, at the cost of 631 dead, 631 wounded, and over 2,000 missing or captured. Mussolini, deeply disappointed, called it a half-victory, but it exposed the Italian army's poor preparation and weak leadership. Undeterred, Mussolini turned to Egypt, a strategic target to control the Suez Canal and sever Britain's routes. From the Italian colony of Libya, fortified since the 1930s with large garrisons, General Rodolfo Graziani led the 10th Army, about 236,000 troops, including black-shirt divisions and Libyan colonial forces. The invasion began on September 13, 1940, aiming to swiftly reach the Nile. However, the Italians moved sluggishly, advancing only 65 miles in 3 days due to shortages of water fuel and weak logistics. They used 19th century marching formations, long lines of unarmored trucks vulnerable to air attacks, while lacking modern tanks and radio communications. Italy's M1139 tanks were outdated, prone to breakdowns in the desert, and soldiers lacked motivation, many being conscripted colonial troops with poor equipment. Graziani, hesitant by nature, halted at Sidi Barrani, a small coastal town, to build a base, dig trenches, and wait for supplies. He wrote in a report, "We have the best colonial army in the world, but they need logistics to survive." In reality, the Italians were stuck there for 2 months, enduring desert heat and severe water shortages, leading to widespread disease. While Italy stalled, Britain launched initial counterattacks. Under General Archibald Wavell, the Western Desert Force, only about 36,000 strong, but better equipped, conducted raids into Libya from July 1940. These small-scale attacks using nimble cruiser tanks and Blenheim aircraft aimed to probe and weaken Italy. A notable raid was at Fort Capuzzo, near the border, where Britain captured hundreds of Italian prisoners and destroyed weapons depots. These actions exposed Italy's weaknesses. Their artillery lacked accuracy, and soldiers often surrendered quickly when surrounded. Wavell used the desert terrain to move flexibly, avoiding direct confrontations and focusing on cutting supply lines. By December 1940, these raids paved the way for Operation Compass, a larger offensive, but they already shook Italian morale. Mussolini from Rome ordered persistence, but Graziani's hesitation led to internal conflicts. Howard Kippenberger, a New Zealand officer who later joined, described, "The Italians were numerous but weak. They built like fortresses but collapsed like sand." These early failures were not just military. They were signs of the greater collapse of Italy's ambitions in Africa. The French fleet issue and Mers-el-Kébir. After France's surrender on June 22, 1940, a new threat emerged: the French fleet, one of Europe's strongest naval forces with over 200 modern warships, including battleships like Richelieu and Strasbourg. The Vichy government under Marshal Philippe Pétain pledged neutrality, keeping the fleet out of German control. Admiral François Darlan, Vichy's navy minister, promised to scuttle the fleet if Germany tried to seize it, per Article 8 of the armistice. However, Churchill and the British cabinet distrusted this. They feared Vichy might be coerced or willingly hand the fleet to the Axis, altering the Mediterranean naval balance. With Germany controlling France's coast, the fleet could threaten Gibraltar and British convoys. Churchill wrote in his memoirs, "This was the greatest danger since Dunkirk." To counter this, Britain launched Operation Catapult, a bold plan to neutralize the French fleet at colonial ports. Key targets included Alexandria, Egypt, Dakar, Senegal, and especially Mers-el-Kébir in Oran, Algeria, home to France's Atlantic Fleet under Admiral Marcel Gensoul, with 4 battleships and 6 destroyers. On July 3, 1940, Britain's Force H, led by Admiral James Somerville from HMS Hood, approached Mers-el-Kébir. They delivered an ultimatum via Captain Cedric Holland: join the Allies, disarm, and move to Martinique, a French Caribbean colony, scuttle the ships, or face attack. Gensoul, loyal to Vichy, refused, citing French honor. Darlan, from afar, ordered resistance if attacked. The battle began at 1754, lasting just 10 minutes but devastating. British ships with longer-range guns and reconnaissance planes from Ark Royal fired over 315-inch shells. The battleship Bretagne was hit in its magazine, exploding and sinking within minutes, killing 977 sailors. Provence was heavily damaged and beached. Dunkirk took 4 hits, immobilized. The destroyer Mogador had its stern destroyed. In total, 297 French sailors died, 351 were wounded, a loss proportionally greater than Pearl Harbor. Britain lost only 2 Swordfish aircraft. Somerville, reluctant, followed orders, later admitting, "This was the darkest day of my career." He delayed for negotiations, but Churchill pressed for decisive action. The aftermath of Mers-el-Kébir was far-reaching. In France, it sparked anti-British fury, boosting support for Vichy and Pétain. French media called it Churchill's crime, leading to protests and attacks on British consulates. Recruitment for General Charles de Gaulle's Free French forces plummeted from thousands to a few hundred. Germany exploited this for propaganda, portraying Britain as a betrayer of former allies. Yet for Britain, it was a strategic success, neutralizing about half the French fleet, securing Mediterranean naval dominance. In Alexandria, Britain persuaded Admiral Godefroy to disarm without bloodshed. Catapult reinforced Churchill's image as a resolute leader, convincing America of Britain's determination. But it also marked a rift in the Allied camp, complicating Franco-British relations post-war. Andrew Roberts, a British historian, assessed Mers-el-Kébir was a morally tough decision, but necessary to save Europe from the Axis. The event underscored the brutal nature of war, a choice between honor and survival. Mediterranean, East Africa, and Italy's Balkan ambitions. While failures in the Alps and Egypt shook Mussolini's ambitions, Italy pushed into East Africa and the Balkans, hoping to bolster its empire. But these hastily planned, under-resourced campaigns only led to more catastrophic defeats. East Africa, where Italy had conquered Ethiopia in 1935, became a strategic springboard. Under the Duke of Aosta, Viceroy of Ethiopia, Italy controlled a vast region with over 250,000 troops, including colonial forces from Eritrea and Somalia. In August 1940, they attacked British Somaliland, a small but key colony controlling access to the Red Sea. With an overwhelming 24,000 troops against Britain's 4,000, Italy captured the capital Hargeisa in days. But this victory was superficial. Aosta realized Italy's army lacked fuel food and long-term planning. Many colonial soldiers forcibly conscripted had no motivation to fight. Camps in Ethiopia faced famine and disease, with thousands dying from malaria. Aosta wrote in a report to Rome, We can hold out for 6 months no more. Without air or naval support, Italy couldn't sustain the occupation, exposing a fatal logistical weakness. Meanwhile, in the Balkans, Mussolini launched an even bolder campaign, the invasion of Greece on October 28, 1940. This decision stemmed from jealousy of Hitler, who had occupied Romania without informing Italy. Mussolini wanted to prove Italy's independence, declaring, "Hitler will see I can make history too." But the plan prepared in just 2 weeks was utterly unrealistic. The Italian army under General Sebastiano Visconti Prasca had only 60,000 troops initially, facing the rugged Pindus Mountains, where snow rain and mud hindered movement. Greece, though smaller, was led by the resolute Prime Minister Ioannis Metaxas. When Italy issued an ultimatum for surrender, Metaxas replied with one immortal word, "Ochi," meaning no, now celebrated as Greece's national day. Greek forces, using terrain and artillery, counterattacked fiercely. They pushed Italy back into Albania, retaking towns like Korça and Pogradec. Within a month, Italy lost over 4,000 men, with thousands captured. A Pindus soldier's diary noted, "We're not fighting Greece, but the mountains and rain. Every step is hell." Mussolini, enraged by the failure, ordered civilian bombings of Athens to apply pressure. But this only strengthened Greek resolve and angered Hitler, who feared the Balkan campaign exposed his Barbarossa plan to attack the Soviet Union. Italy had to reinforce with 150,000 troops, but still couldn't reverse the tide. Command weaknesses from Prasca to the Italian general staff were laid bare. Lacking suitable tanks and heavy artillery, Italy couldn't breach Greek defenses. The invasion was not just a military failure, it undermined Mussolini's credibility with his German ally. Christopher Duggan, a historian specializing in Italy, remarked, "The Balkans were proof of Mussolini's arrogance. He wanted an empire but gained only defeat." East Africa and Greece marked a turning point. Italy couldn't sustain its imperial ambitions without German dependence, paving the way for greater failures. WWII, Italy's defeats in Greece and Taranto. Mussolini's invasion of Greece, begun with hopes of an easy victory, quickly turned into a nightmare at the battlefields of Kalpaki and Pindus. By November 1940, the Italian army, now under General Ubaldo Sotu after Sebastiano Visconti. Prasca's dismissal faced unprecedented harsh conditions. The elite Giulia Division, with 10,000 troops, was trapped in torrential rain and mud in the Pindus Mountains. Greek artillery, positioned on Kalpaki's peaks, fired relentlessly with deadly accuracy, destroying Italian supply convoys. Within 2 weeks, Giulia lost over 2,000 men, nearly a fifth of its force, along with hundreds of trucks and guns. Italian soldiers, lacking warm clothing and food, began deserting. An Italian officer's diary recorded, "We no longer fight the enemy, but death from above." Mussolini from Rome ordered intensified civilian bombings, targeting cities like Thessaloniki to pressure Greece. But this only fueled Greek resistance. By late November, Greek forces backed by local militias pushed Italy deep into Albanian territory, capturing strongholds like Himare. This defeat enraged Hitler, forcing Germany to plan Balkan intervention, delaying the Soviet invasion. But the true knockout blow came from the sea. On the night of November 11, 1940, Taranto, Italy's largest southern naval base, became the target of a daring air raid. The Italian Navy, boasting 6 battleships and dozens of cruisers, was anchored at Taranto, seemingly safe in its shallow bay. But Britain, under Admiral Andrew Cunningham, had prepared a new weapon, the duplex torpedo, operable in just 10 meters of water. From the carrier, HMS Illustrious 21 swordfish biplanes, outdated but agile, took off at night guided by moonlight and flares. In 2 waves, they dropped 11 torpedoes, hitting 3 battleships. Littorio was heavily damaged. Duilio and Conte di Cavour sank on the spot. In just 90 minutes, Italy lost half its Mediterranean naval strength, with 59 sailors killed and over 600 wounded. Britain lost only 2 aircraft to anti-aircraft fire. Italian Admiral Marc Antonio Bragadin later wrote, "Taranto was an irreparable disaster. We underestimated Britain." This raid was not just a military victory, it marked a turning point in naval warfare. Taranto proved the power of carrier-based airstrikes, inspiring Japan's Pearl Harbor attack the following year. For Italy, the twin defeats at Greece and Taranto exposed strategic and technological weaknesses. Mussolini had to request German aid, diminishing Italy's standing in the Axis. Italian troops in Greece continued retreating, losing another 13,000 men by year's end. Taranto left the Italian fleet too scared to leave port, handing Britain naval dominance. James Holland, a historian, noted, "Taranto was a technological turning point. Britain turned a small squadron into a devastating weapon." These defeats not only shook Mussolini's ambitions, but solidified Churchill's attrition strategy, making the Mediterranean Britain's playground. British counterattacks in North Africa and East Africa. Italy's failures in Greece and Taranto opened a golden opportunity for Britain. With naval dominance secured, the British Empire launched counterattacks in 2 key theaters, North Africa and East Africa. In North Africa, General Archibald Wavell, Middle East commander, tasked General Richard O'Connor with leading the Western Desert Force, a small but elite 36,000-man army, against Italy's 10th Army in Egypt. In December 1940, Operation Compass targeted Sidi Barrani, where General Rodolfo Graziani had fortified with 60,000 troops. But the Italians, though outnumbering, were scattered across isolated desert forts, lacking communication and morale. O'Connor leveraged the Matilda II tank, heavily armored and nearly impervious to Italian anti-tank guns. In 48 hours from December 9th, British forces struck unexpectedly, breaching Italian lines. They captured 38 through 300 prisoners, destroyed 237 guns and 73 tanks, while losing only 624 men, including 88 dead. Australian and Indian units played key roles, using trucks to move swiftly across the desert, encircling and cutting off Italian supplies. Operation Compass didn't stop. O'Connor advanced deep into Libya, capturing Bardia on January 5, 1941, with another 40,000 prisoners, then Tobruk on January 22, taking 27,000 more. In 2 months, Britain captured over 115,000 Italian prisoners, with a force 3 times smaller. Graziani, shocked by the speed of defeat, wrote, "The British move like demons. We had no chance." The victory stemmed not just from tactics, but from Italy's internal weaknesses: starving soldiers, disoriented officers, and poor coordination between divisions. O'Connor turned the desert into a weapon, isolating and destroying each stronghold. In East Africa, Britain struck back decisively. After Italy's occupation of British Somaliland in August 1940, Wavell organized forces from Sudan and Kenya to retake the region. In February 1941, British troops, supported by South African and East African colonial units like the King's African Rifles, entered Mogadishu, the capital of Italian Somaliland. The Italians, under the Duke of Aosta, barely resisted, abandoning the city with its weapons and fuel stores. Britain then advanced into Ethiopia, pledging to restore Emperor Haile Selassie, ousted by Italy in 1935. Selassie with Ethiopian guerrillas helped Britain retake towns like Keren and Amba Alagi. By May 1941, Ethiopia was liberated, marking Italy's complete defeat in East Africa. Britain seized over 420,000 square miles of territory, with minimal losses, about 500 dead and 1,400 wounded. These campaigns were not just military victories, but psychological blows. They shattered Mussolini's credibility, forcing Italy to seek German aid, leading to Rommel and the Afrika Korps' arrival. Basil Liddell Hart, a British military historian, remarked, "Compass proved flexible tactics. Britain turned small numbers into a great advantage." These victories solidified Britain's Mediterranean position, but posed new challenges: how to maintain momentum as Germany intervened more forcefully. Conclusion and legacy. The year 1940 marked a crucial victory for the British Empire. Through resilience and bold strategy, Britain thwarted Italy's ambitions in the Mediterranean, from the North African desert to Taranto's port. They successfully defended strategic lifelines, Gibraltar, Malta, the Suez Canal, and held the home islands against German invasion threats. Victories like Operation Compass and Ethiopia's liberation not only shook Mussolini, but sent a message to the world: Britain remained a formidable empire. Germany, despite dominating Europe, couldn't effectively intervene in the Mediterranean that year. John Darwin, an Oxford historian, wrote, "1940 was the year Britain saved the empire with the empire, a feat of unity and global strength." But behind this glory lay challenges quietly shaping the future. The Nazis, though not yet directly confronting Britain in North Africa, remained a major threat. German U-boats intensified attacks on Atlantic merchant convoys, endangering Britain's food and fuel supplies. In 1940, Germany sank over 1,000 ships, causing 4 million tons of cargo losses, a figure that alarmed London with fears of starvation and energy shortages. Churchill knew that despite triumphs over Italy, Britain couldn't face Germany alone. Dependence on America grew clear with the Lend-Lease Act negotiated late that year, paving the way for U.S. weapons and financial aid. But the cost was strategic dependence, weakening Britain's independent stance. Internally, the empire showed irreparable cracks. Dominions like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, though loyal, began demanding greater autonomy. Canada, with its robust industrial economy, sought an independent voice in Allied conferences. Australia, after sending troops to the Middle East, demanded direct protection against Japan's threat. South Africa, under Boer tensions, faced internal division risks. But the greatest challenge came from India. The independence movement led by Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru surged. The 1940 civil disobedience campaign, though suppressed, drew millions. Nehru declared, "Freedom is not a gift from Britain, it's a right we will seize." India's military mobilization, with over 2 million volunteer soldiers by war's end, was a strength but also a spark for the 1942 Quit India movement, ending British control. The 1940 victories, though brilliant, were a double-edged sword. The British Empire mobilized all resources, from Canadian raw materials to Kenyan manpower, to survive. But this mobilization exposed mutual dependence and ignited freedom aspirations in colonies. When the war ended, India, Egypt, and others would demand independence, leading to the empire's dissolution in the 1950s. John Darwin noted, "The war saved the empire, but also sowed the seeds of its collapse." The year 1940 was the peak of British strength, but also the start of a new era, the era of independent nations. Thank you for following this historical journey. Subscribe to explore more about World War II.